let me go ahead. If y'all just pass those forward, then I'll pick them up. Just kind of you staking a claim to your topic that you're going to do. All right. These, get y'all's. These here. These. Okay. The students, if for some reason you did not get this done, if for some reason you did not get this done and you were here when it was announced and it slipped your mind or whatever it may have been, be sure that you get on that immediately, lest that homework grade start diminishing due to its tardiness. So be sure that you're getting that done. All of this overall grade will end up being averaged together, and that's what's going to become your replacement grade in the project. So this is just a little turn-in homework grade right here. If you did not get it done, then be sure you get it done, lest you get the late grade for it, because then that'll start to wear down the average on the overall project. So just be sure that you get that done promptly. Okay, let's go ahead and let's talk just a little bit about some of the things that you read. Let's see if you can remember some of these things as we look at page 100. What was the period of peace in the Mediterranean world lasting from 31 BC to AD 180? What was that known as? Katie, go ahead.
The Pax Romana.
The Pax Romana, which means what, Leo? The Roman peace. The Roman peace. Now, why was this time period referred to as the Roman peace? Why was it referred to as that, Faith? Okay, Jesus Christ is born during this time, but there were a lot of Roman citizens that were unaware of that. Yet still, most of the Roman citizens referred to this as the Pax Romana. Yes, the Prince of Peace was born, but why was it called the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace? Chris?
Conquered like most of the Mediterranean or the world or whatever.
Okay, so they...
it wasn't a lot of wars. There wasn't a lot of wars like that.
Okay, thank you. That's especially why it was called the Pax Romana. They had conquered the known world. They had conquered the Mediterranean world, and it was a time period of 180 plus 30. It was a time period of about 221 years. 211 years. 211 years of relative peace. Relative peace in the known world. There weren't any wars being fought. Things were positive and productive for the most part. Now, when we say that, we're talking in the national sense, of peace. Can you think of things that were not very peaceful that occurred during this time period?
All the babies being killed.
Okay, Herod. When he, it's during this time period that Herod calls for the death of Judean babies that were 2 years of age or younger.
That wasn't in Rome, was it?
It was in the Roman Empire. It was in the Roman Empire. So yes, we would say it was in Rome, the empire sense. Does that make sense? So notice how we can say, well, that wasn't peaceful. What else took place during this time period that was not peaceful? Leo? There was corruption. There was corruption. Something else you'll be reading about soon in your textbook. Persecution of Christians, great persecutions. Those things were not peaceful. However, we do refer to this as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. Am I lying when I call it the time of Roman peace? No. But we've just said that these things weren't very peaceful. They were violent. Okay, overall, and in a sense of the nations of the world and the nations of the West, there was peace. Okay, so I want you to understand that. To the Romans, they had ushered in a time of peace over the Mediterranean world. So in that sense, there was peace, but it wasn't perfect. It wasn't total. Okay, 3 titles or names by which Octavian was called. 3 titles. Can you name me one of them? Okay, go for all 3.
Okay. Prince Keeps.
All right.
Caesar and Augustus.
Okay, Caesar, Augustus, and Princeps. All right, now, or sometimes just Princeps. It would be referred to also. Now, as we look at those things, notice these titles for you and I from the Christmas story, right? Any of y'all ever watched Charlie Brown, the Christmas Charlie Brown, or whatever it is, the Peanuts? Y'all ever watch that? Come on, nobody wants to admit to watching cartoons, or is it just so old that you've never watched it?
1,000 times.
1,000 times. He's like, I got it memorized. Every Christmas, my little brother wants to watch that, and we watch it. Okay, so if you've ever watched that, and you know Charlie Brown's all frustrated, you know, and he says, what's the real meaning of Christmas? Linus walks out on center stage with his blanket. He's holding it there, and he says, I can tell you the meaning of Christmas, Charlie Brown. And he spends time saying, and in those days there went out a decree from
Caesar Augustus.
Caesar Augustus, and that's our guy Octavian. Caesar Augustus, there went out a decree that everybody was going to be taxed and had to go to their home city and all of that. So biblical history records one of the major reforms that Caesar Augustus, Octavian, brought about. Hold on, let me check. So we record that. Now, most of us don't know him through the Bible as Princeps. What was the significance of this title, Princeps? I mean, what was so important about that? Let me hear from somebody that I have not yet heard from. Have you not read? What did Princeps mean? Emily.
First citizen.
The first citizen. All right, he was the first citizen. Okay, so what was so important about that? First citizen.
Made him kind of like the villain.
Okay, the idea was that he was naming himself first citizen, and he was basically saying, I am not like some nobility or monarch or any of those kinds of things. Instead, I'm just like one of you. It's just like I'm captain of the team. I'm the first citizen. I'm just like one of you, but I'm kind of like the premier. So notice what he was saying there. Now, politically, what was Octavian trying to do in some of those times when he said, hey, I'm first citizen?
Popularity.
He was gaining popularity. Yes, he was changing the form of the government, too. Or at least in word, he was changing the form of the government. What was he changing it to?
A monarchy.
A monarchy? Sort of, but he was saying he was changing it to what?
Oh, it didn't matter.
A republic. He was saying that he was bringing back the days of the republic, and that he was going to share power with the Senate. Now, in truth, what ended up happening was more like a monarch. He was more like a monarch because he always had the power of the military behind him. And he would say, well, how about let's vote on that? But the Senate knew that if they didn't vote his way, he might bring the army in and kill them all. So they kind of voted with him. They knew he was first citizen, or boss. Okay, what did Octavian institute within the empire in order to provide for fairer taxing of provinces? What did he institute here? Katie?
He ordered a census taken throughout the empire.
He orders the census, and he's going to base the taxing on the people that are there. In other words, when he calls on these publicans to raise a tax, he doesn't just tell them all, okay, you all have to raise this much money. You remember when we were talking about the publicans, we spoke about how they were these tax collectors for Rome in the provinces. And what they were expected to do was to go out and get money for the government by enforcing different tax laws. And the idea was basically, if you were walking down the street, they might walk up to you and they may say, "Oh, are you wearing a belt today? Well, do you know that there's a 2-cent tax on belt wearing? So you have to pay that. Oh, and I see that you're driving a cart with 2 horses. Did you know that you have to pay a 10-cent tax if you're using this road, 10 cents per horse, so that's going to be 20 cents. So they'd go out and they'd kind of stiff arm and collect these taxes from people. And the expectation was that they had a quota to fill. In other words, this publican owed the Roman government, let's say, $10,000 in that year. Well, he knew his quota. Nobody else knew his quota. He went out there and collected, and the Roman government said, if you happen to collect $35,000 this year, then you keep the 25. You take the rest. And basically, they cheated a lot of folks. And publicans were not highly regarded for this. As a matter of fact, Matthew, the apostle, was a tax collector or a publican before the Lord called him to follow him. Zacchaeus, we learned a little song. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. Climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. Well, if you read that story, Zacchaeus was a publican. And Zacchaeus, when he repented and came to the Lord, he said, I'm going to take everything that I've stolen from people and I'm going to give it back. And then I'm going to take all the rest of the wealth that I have and I'm going to give it to the poor. So he surrendered his life of embezzlement and extortion, and he gave those things back. Well, the problem was that those quotas were just arbitrarily announced by the Caesar. So Octavian comes along and he says, I've got a better way to figure out those quotas. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take a census. We're going to see how many people are there, and then we're going to tell the publicans, you raise taxes based on the population. You raise taxes based on the number of people. Okay? Because it was kind of unfair if a little village had 10,000 people for them to pay the same tax rate, for all of them to have to produce the same amount of money as, say, a village that had 1 million people. The people that had 1 million weren't paying as high taxes because each was paying less money. So notice how Octavian changed that. How often did he order this to take place? This census rating? Every 14 years. And during one of those times, during one of those censi, it ended up causing Joseph and Mary to go to the city of their fathers, right? The city of David. They had to go back to their hometown to go through this census and to pay this tax. And as they went through this census and paid this tax, that's when the city of Bethlehem was overcrowded, and Mary gave birth to Jesus during this time. Okay, how did many of the self-seeking, corrupt emperors of the late empire win the favor of the people? It's important for us to notice this with the fall of Rome. How did they do this? Caroline, do you remember reading?
By providing free grain and amusement for the Roman people.
Free groceries and free entertainment. Free groceries and free entertainment. And basically they would start, as they were trying to take over the empire, they would say, if I were emperor, I would be sure that there were a free chicken in every pot. I would be sure that everything, that this much groceries would be free. And when the people would get frustrated while they were emperor, then they would pass some new law and give a few more groceries away. Grain would be given. Now, let's talk about this, or let me ask this question. Okay, of the things that you read, let's do this. What's something that you remember? Hey, how about y'all close your textbooks for a moment? Maybe put a piece of paper in there. Put a piece of paper, something so you can flip back to it or something like that. Put a piece of paper in there, close it. But tell me, what do you remember reading about? Let's talk about it for a moment. Let's talk about your reading. We've discussed a few things. Sarah, tell me something.
didn't really have a plan for choosing a successor.
Okay, who would he be?
Who would he be?
The guy that didn't have a plan for choosing a successor.
One with the different names and costumes.
Okay, the one with the different names, Caesar Augustus, Octavian. Okay, so one of the, by the way, notice how this section emphasizes Octavian, Caesar Augustus. It's because Caesar Augustus was considered one of the great emperors of Rome. Now, when we say that he was considered great, it doesn't mean he was good. It means he was big. What good things did he do for the Roman Empire? Let's look at some of those things. Let's try to remember them and talk about them. What were some of the things that you remember that he did to benefit the Roman Empire? Beth?
He kind of declared like a republic and
Okay, so he started, at least on the surface and at least for appearances, and on a lot of the minor things, he did move back toward the idea of a republic, that the people would be represented in the Senate, and that he would sort of rule along with the Senate. That was an idea, and a lot of the Romans appreciated that idea. It gave the Senate a great deal of power, and at times in the future, as the Senate had a great deal of power, it prevented some of the emperors from just really going crazy stupid. Some of them still went crazy stupid, but it kept them from harming the people because the power was a pushback power. Tristan, something else that he did. Okay, he begins the census to try to equal out the tax code, basically. The idea was that each person was going to come and pay a certain amount of taxes based on the folks in their household, and less the idea that people are just going to be extorted on the street by the publicans. Okay, so we tried to even the tax code out. All right, something else that Octavian did. Do you remember reading about him? Caroline.
He made himself a first citizen. He wanted to be like everybody else.
Okay, he communicates to the people that I'm just one of you. This distinction between me ruling over you, sort of my foot in your throat type of thing. That distinction, he's going to back away from that. He's saying I'm just like one of you. Anything else that we've not discussed so far that Octavian or Caesar Augustus did? Well, something that he tried to do that failed. Oh, guys, have we not read? Somebody knows. Tell me somebody read, can remember. By the way, when you read, it's important that you read for meaning. It's important that you read for understanding. I believe some of you have read it, but it might have been Friday night, and now it's slipped your mind, perhaps. But notice also that Octavian, or Caesar Augustus, worked to bring about some moral reforms to Roman society. He wanted Rome to return to her moral roots, where she emphasized the structure of the family. Take a look at this. At the bottom of page 98. Hey, Chris, turn to the bottom of page 98 and let's take a look at this for a moment. That final paragraph on page 98. Who would read that for us? Would you read it, Chris?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Augustus correctly realized that civilization is only as strong as the moral character of the people. Therefore, he sought social reforms to receive the traditional Roman virtues of duty, discipline, and hard work. He encouraged the passage of laws that promoted family life and rewarded those families that had many children. Other laws punished immorality and placed limits on extravagant living.
All right, let me get you to stop right there. Notice what Caesar Augustus tries to do. He tries to pass laws that encourage family life. He passes laws that encourage family life. Let me ask you some questions. And notice it goes on to say, reforms to revive the traditional Roman virtues of duty, discipline, hard work. He encouraged the passage of laws that promoted family life, rewarded those families that had many children. Let me ask you a question. What kinds of laws can the government pass that encourage family life, or that encourage families to have a lot of kids? I mean, how does the government influence money to do that?
Work.
Right?
They get like more money, get paid jobs for us.
What's that?
Like good economy, maybe.
Okay, if the government can do things to help strengthen the economy, then dads can provide for their families better. You see what I'm saying? So maybe there's an idea. Are there ways that the government can encourage stronger families? Other ideas. Tristan? Okay, if the government were to give them money for having kids, okay, then that's gonna cause kids it's gonna encourage more children to be born. Or maybe the government doesn't just give them a handout, but what might the government be able to do?
Oh,
Go ahead, Leo.
it might also give them more soldiers to enlist in their army.
Okay, that would help the government if they had more kids, absolutely. But rather than just giving a handout to families, what might they do, Bethany?
Tax deduction.
Okay, if they tell them they don't have to pay as much in taxes for every kid that they have. Do you see what I'm saying? Because the idea is, if I go out and I make $60,000 a year, and I have 2 children, then I'm going to have to consume a certain amount of my wealth to provide for my 2 kids. And then I'm going to have to pay the government their taxes. But if I had 8 children, and I were making the $60,000 a year, then the government might say, hey, look, rather than make this difficult on you to have 8 children, what we want to do instead is we want to back off the taxes that we expect of you, so you can take your money and spend more of it on your kids. It's a little different than straight giving them money. It's the idea of backing off the tax expectation for them. So increased tax deductions. And by the way, the United States of America, according to our tax code now, the more kids you have, the more dependents you have in your household, the more tax deductions you get. Some would say, well, it's not worth it. It is worth it. There's arguments on all the sides. But notice that idea. Notice the idea of paying taxes or having a break on taxes because those for extra children. What are other ways that the government might encourage family life?
Give them jobs.
Like a school system.
Okay. If there were a good school system, that's going to encourage family life. One of the primary responsibilities of parents is to educate their children, to make sure that education is provided for them. So if the government works to provide good schools, or to make sure those schools are working in an area, then now families are freer to go out and work, and the kids can go to school, and the parents have confidence in that. Other things that they might be able to do. What about mandating a work week with a Saturday off? That's something that helps family life. Imagine that if all of us, all the time, had to work 6 or 7 days out of the week, what would that do to our family life? It would really begin to hinder it. It would begin to put it into question. So notice some of those things. Now, here's the big question. Here's the question of the hour. All right? He tries these moral reforms. What motivates him to do this? Because he's just a good-hearted guy? Bethany.
Well, if people are moral, they're not going to go kill people and they want to stop. They'll maintain order.
Maintains order. As a matter of fact, think about our nation. Is our nation becoming more and more plagued with violence? I think we'd say yes. I think as we look around, we're seeing more and more people that are having mental issues and mental diseases and struggling with schizophrenia and psychosis and all of this kind of stuff. And what's the result? A lot of times, not all the time, But a lot of times the result ends up being some of these mass murders that we're seeing. And that puts everybody on edge. It creates tension in our communities and in our societies. It's tough stuff. And the idea is if we could get families strengthened in the nation, then it would help with a lot of these things. So notice the peace that it would bring to the nation. By the way, think about this. I'll say it again. That Western civilization, or any great civilization, is the result of a social, cultural system where the family is strengthened. The family is strengthened. Hey, here's an example. Here's an example with the structure of society. We think about the family being strengthened right here. They're here recently in a Rosedale, Michigan school district. There's been a mass withdrawal. In other words, it's a public school district, and families are withdrawing their children from the elementary school en masse, to the point that the school is fixing to lose like 60% of her students. And these parents are pulling the kids out. What's motivating the parents to pull the kids out? Two things. Number one, that school district had a teacher who was convicted for sexually harassing a 14-year-old student. All right? So number one, that was the first thing. Well, the school district terminated that person, and then they fired him, right? And then that guy is going to trial, and all of that kind of stuff is happening. But then, as that guy's going through the court system, 7 of his colleague teachers wrote a letter to the judge defending him, saying that he should be allowed to be a teacher again and reinstated at the elementary school. So do you notice the problem? If you were a parent and you had your elementary kids, your children, in a school where 7 other teachers said, this guy should be let teach again, even though he was convicted of sexually harassing the student. Harassing is really an understatement. Sexually molesting. So if that were the case, and your child was there, would you want your child to finish school there?
No.
Neither do 60% of the parents in that school. And the school board and the administration at that school have decided that they are not going to fire the 7 teachers that wrote this letter of support. A lot of the parents are demanding. What's that?
I say, well, their school's going to be closed.
Pretty soon, their school is going to be shut down. I mean, their school is going to become so small that a bunch of those teachers end up without jobs anyway. I mean, because why do you hire teachers? To teach kids, right? Well, if you don't have kids, you're going to have to fire teachers. I mean, you can't pay them to just sit there. So pretty soon it's going to self-destruct anyway. So notice that idea. Notice how if there were a government wanting families and wanting families to be strong, they would come into that area, just like you said, hey, let's provide families with good schools. And they would come into that area and they'd say, we're going to clean house. We're not going to have this nonsense. Parents don't need to send their kids to a school where they think everybody's either a pervert or a supporter of the perverts. You know, it's just not gonna work. We're gonna straighten things out. Well, a school system is fixing to crumble if they don't address some of the moral issues. All right, so we've talked about that. Let's think about this idea. Was he successful? Why not? Now, I want you to think about this. There are a lot of times where people will say, well, you can't legislate morality. What does that mean? You can't pass laws that make people moral in their heart. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
I would agree with that statement, that you cannot pass laws that make people moral in their heart. However, we also have to think about this. all laws that are passed are based on a moral code. Okay? So a lot of times people will say, well, the government shouldn't say anything about marriage because you can't legislate morality. Okay, now wait a minute. A law is the enforcement of some moral expectation. Just remember that. It always is. It's the enforcement of moral expectation. True, you cannot pass a law that changes the heart of men. You cannot pass a law that makes people more moral. However, we do expect our government to legislate based on morality. Why do we say, thou shalt not kill?
So it's more
It's
right.
wrong to kill somebody.
Because we believe it's morally right to abstain from murder, right? We believe that. Does our government pass laws that enforce that moral idea?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Are they legislating based on morality? They are. And pretty much universally, people believe that it's wrong to murder. Okay? The one exception would probably be jihadists. That's a little strange there, right? But, what's that?
What is that like?
A jihadist? What's the difference between, a jihadist is like a Muslim terrorist, you know, that goes out and commits that. So in their moral code, there is an appropriate time to murder. Now, I define it murder. They're going to define it, no, that's approved by Allah and the Quran, right? Yeah.
I think we had this discussion on Mr. Broom's class.
Mhm.
If they think it's morally okay to murder somebody,
That's right.
is it okay?
If they think it is,
Yes.
no, it's not. What gives me the authority to say that? My morality.
But that's their morality. I'm
That's
not
right.
sitting here like, okay,
Yes,
go,
you're right.
I'm not sitting here,
No,
let's go
I understand.
blow something up. You know,
I understand what you're saying. You're saying, and by the way, I want y'all to listen closely to this. Atheism, if there is no God, then we cannot sit back and say my morality is better than your morality. Really, we wouldn't even have morality. Then it'd just be everybody to himself, right? What gives me the authority to say my morality is better than his?
Oh, God. That's about it.
Only God, but that's about it. So how do I make sure my morality is the law of the land? Bethany?
Well, if his morality causes harm to other people, then you can't really.
Okay, if his morality causes harm to these other people, but he's going to say it's acceptable for his moral code. And I'm going to say, no, it's not. Now, I'm just picking on Chris. He does not espouse that view, but let's say that it's Chris.
They can be sitting over there in some, world history class right now saying how,
Those
Christians are so immoral.
That's right. And by the way, guys, y'all want to hear something? Let me just draw it to a conclusion right here. The only thing that gives me in this nation, or really anywhere, the ability to say my morality will be the law of the land is the idea of sovereignty in the nation. And how is sovereignty maintained? Through force or the threat thereof. In other words, what I'm saying is this: the only way for the United States to make sure that jihadism doesn't become the law of the United States is for us to say, no, as a nation, we're basing our moral system on these values, these ideas, not those. And if you don't like it, you can leave, or you can conform. Do you see what I'm saying? By the way, if I were to move over there, okay, over there being a Sharia law Middle Eastern country, okay, if I were to move over there, and my wife were to go in public, okay, not covered, okay, what would the expectation be?
They would either kill her or beat her up to death.
Now, I could say, well, that's against my morality. My wife is not going to do that. But how do they ensure that their morality is the law of the land? Through force, or the threat thereof, and the fact that that's their nation. Does that make sense? So really, on an earthly system, in an earthly manner, the only way that we can say, no, we're not going to do that, is with a military force, and a national government and popular sovereignty that says, here's our moral values, that's the law of our land, conform or leave, conform or face the penalty. Does that make sense? By the way, wouldn't it work the same way if I were over there? You see what I'm saying? If my wife went out and she weren't covered, they would come up and they'd say, if she's going to be in my land, she's going to, you see what I'm saying? So they're going to impose their moral value system on me and my family if I were there, in the same way that you and I should be willing to impose our moral value system on them. Now, when I say impose our moral value system on them, I do believe there's a boundary to that, right? I'm not saying that it is right that we force everybody to go to church. God doesn't even do that. But we do, as a nation, have a legal system based on moral values, right? Now, does that mean that every judge hearing every case in the United States is a Christian? No. Does that mean that they open up the Bible and say, what does the Bible say? No. But why do you and I believe that murder is wrong?
So I would want to be murdered,
It
and
doesn't feel it, right?
I mean,
You see how we do have that moral idea in American society. Some would say, well, that's wherever they get it from. We still have that moral idea that murder's wrong. You and I say, well, it's biblical.
I think
It's
everybody
biblical.
does it wrong.
What's that?
I think everybody does is wrong, but
Except for the
if it's
murderers.
biblical or
That's
not really
right.
doesn't matter. Everybody does it wrong.
And to a certain extent, there seems to be this morality that's written on our hearts, like the Bible talks about, to where we know murder is wrong. Yes.
well, I mean, I understand it's wrong, but even in the Bible, we read about where Israelites would be going against God or doing something like that, and God would kill them, or or kill their animals or their kids and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So is that murder, and is that right?
Here's the question: can God murder? Can he?
He can.
You can kill.
I mean, he's not gonna come down here and
He can kill.
he's not gonna come down here
Can
and
he
put a
murder?
gun to your head, but
Right.
he has the capability of.
He kind of made everything around us, so he can do whatever he wants with it.
Now, think about that idea right there too, and that's an idea. I mean, that's a pretty potent idea. If I build a sandcastle on the beach, and I'm a little 6-year-old kid, and so are you, and Caroline runs over and stomps on my sandcastle and spits on it and says, "Ha ha, your sandcastle's stupid," all right, and runs off. What am I going to do as a 6-year-old kid?
You don't go after her.
I'm going to cry. I'm going to tell my mama. I'm going to tell her mama. I may run her down and throw sand in her face. Okay. However, if I'm a 6-year-old kid, I build the sandcastle myself. It's mine, and then I decide to stomp it. It's mine. So back to the question: can God murder? To a certain extent, in Him and by Him and through Him, we move. We have our being. We are His creation. And then, can the created say to the Creator, "You're wrong"? Does that make sense? So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that from that idea. If morality is His, and by the way, we're getting way off from this, but I want you to understand that all legislation is based on a moral value system. All laws, the law of the land is based on a moral value system. Now, you cannot make a law that changes the heart of men. We see here that the law that was passed did not change the heart of men, and Roman civilization still continued down its path toward destruction. We're going to pay attention to that a little more.